Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States, accompanied by Secretary Madeleine Albright and Representative John Lewis.
Mr. President, Representatives Lewis, Gilman, Pastor, Payne, Jackson Lee, distinguished honorees, Craig Cuney, Alexander Aris, colleagues and guests, good morning and welcome to the annual commemoration of Human Rights Day at the White House. We're here to recognize outstanding contributions made by Americans to the cause of human rights. The careers of Tilly Black Bear, Fred Cuney, Norman Dorson, Elaine Jones, and Archbishop Theodore McCarrick are fully in keeping with the leadership and humanity shown by Eleanor Roosevelt, for whom the awards we present today are named. Their lives and these awards reflect our nation's commitment to the principle that every person is entitled to certain fundamental and inalienable rights. Americans are fortunate that for the past 8 years, we have had a president who has made this principle a major part of U.S. foreign policy. Under President Clinton, we have worked hard to promote democracy because we believe that people everywhere should be able to elect their own leaders, worship freely, receive due process, and enjoy the benefits of a democratic life. This belief is supported by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and has been reaffirmed in recent resolutions at the United Nations General Assembly and Human Rights Commission. It's no coincidence that the world today is more free than it has ever been. It is also no coincidence that international human rights institutions are far stronger than when President Clinton took office. At his direction, America helped lead the successful effort to create a UN Human Rights Commissioner for Human Rights. We led the way in creating the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda, the Balkans, and now Sierra Leone, and we helped gain agreement with Cambodia on special arrangements for prosecution of the Khmer Rouge. The Clinton administration has also been very active at the bargaining table. Next week, we will join countries from around the world in signing a convention against transnational crime, including a protocol to crack down on the despicable practice of trafficking in human beings. With help from Congress, we have implemented the Torture Convention and ratified the Convention Against All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We negotiated and approved a convention to ban the worst forms of child labor and have increased funding tenfold to combat such exploitation. We have also shown that when truly necessary, America will back our diplomatic support for human rights with force. When diplomacy did not succeed, President Clinton and our NATO counterparts acted to end the war in Bosnia and reverse ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. We have supported multilateral peace missions that have improved human rights in Haiti to East Timor and from eastern Slavonia to Mozambique. And our president has been a tireless champion of peace in Northern Ireland, the Middle East, Chechnya, and Africa. I'm also proud of the work done by Assistant Secretary of State Harold Koh and his team to report thoroughly, honestly, and annually on human rights and religious freedom. We've worked closely with the NGOs and the private sector to promote labor standards and recognize exemplary corporate practices. And with strong support from the President and the Senator-elect from New York, we have made efforts to improve the lives of women and girls, part of the mainstream of American foreign policy. We have also spoken out and supported those who lead for freedom in places that are not yet free. Serbia, until very recently, was one example. Burma is another, and nothing could be more appropriate than the recognition President Clinton will shortly bestow upon Aung San Suu Kyi, who embodies the very principles of democracy that the Burmese people cherish but have so long been denied. Respect for human rights belongs within the heart of American foreign policy, and that is where it has been these past 8 years, and that is where it ought to stay for all the years to come. And now I have the very welcome job of introducing to you someone most of you already know. Representative John Lewis was one of the first recipients of the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award. He's been a leader for civil rights and social justice throughout his career. Like many who are unafraid to speak out, he has endured violence and vituperation. But his love has proven stronger than the bigot's hate, and our nation may be thankful that his dignified voice is now raised on behalf of human dignity as a leading member of the United States Congress. Please help me welcome Representative John Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your wonderful words of introduction. I want to also thank you for all of your great and good work to make our world a little more peaceful. Mr. President, I am very pleased and delighted to be with you to honor these remarkable individuals who have given so much to the struggle for human rights and to recognize them for their commitment to the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I was truly honored to be one of the first to receive the Eleanor Roosevelt Award 2 years ago. Just think, it really wasn't that many years ago when I, along with many others, fought to end racial segregation in places of public accommodation, fought for the right to vote, and to expand the political process to include all Americans. Sometimes I feel that I was touched by what I like to call the spirit of history. Long ago, as a young boy, growing up in rural Alabama, I heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s voice on an old radio talking about the philosophy of passive resistance and nonviolence during the Montgomery bus boycott. Later, as a young student in Nashville, I responded to Dr. King's call with everything that I had to end segregation and racial discrimination in our nation. With our sit-ins, the freedom rides, our marches, and other forms of nonviolent protests, we expressed the hope for a new and better America. This year's recipients of the Eleanor Roosevelt Award, in their own unique and remarkable ways, have worked and continue to work on the front line in the battle for human rights. They have struggled to liberate all humankind from hate, from persecution, from want, from hunger, from abuse, and from violence. They have sailed against the wind for the cause of human rights. They have put their bodies on the line for the cause, and they never gave up. They never gave in, and they never gave out. It is my hope that the Eleanor Roosevelt Award will inspire others, especially young people, to be swept up by the spirit of history or to just get in the way, to make our nation, our world, a better place for everyone, to express themselves by standing up, speaking out, and speaking up for human rights, and to fight to make the Universal Declaration of Human Rights a living reality. If we care for human rights, we must use our hands, our voices, our resources to build and not to tear down, to reconcile and not to divide, to love and not to hate, to heal and not to kill. In a final analysis, we're one people, one family, one world. Mr. President, thank you very much, our friend, my dear friend. You have stood up for human rights here at home and abroad, and the world is a much better place for your service and commitment to improving the dignity of humankind all over this world. Mr. President, we will greatly miss you and your leadership, your vision, your commitment. Thank you, sir. Now it is my great privilege to introduce the President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning. Let me begin by thanking Secretary Albright for her remarks and her 8 years of leadership, first at the United Nations and then at the State Department, always standing up and speaking out for human rights. And my friend of so many years, John Lewis, whom I knew before I ever decided to run for president, who started with me and, as you can hear, is going out with me, finishing. In my private office on the second floor of the White House residence, I have a picture of a very young John Lewis being beaten at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma that I was given when we went back there on the 35th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And he has worked now for more than 35 years. I can't help noting that he's still at it. He had a piece in the New York Times the other day making the simple but apparently controversial point that the right to vote includes not only the right to cast the vote, but the right to have it counted. Thank you, John. I also want to welcome James Roosevelt and his wife Ann here, and members of the Congress, Congressman Ben Gilman, Donald Payne, and Ed Pastor. I want to thank Sandy Berger and Eric Schwartz, who have worked at the White House on human rights since the day we got here in 1993. I want to thank, in his absence, Assistant Secretary of State Harold Koh, who tried to come back from Africa today to be here but couldn't make it, and our ambassador to the UN Human Rights Commission, Nancy Rubin. We are here today to honor 6 extraordinary people. Like Madeline, I also want to say that I wish Hillary could be here, but she's at senator school today. It's been a great 2 days at our house going to senator school. I had to make sure that, I said, you know, yesterday I said, this is your first day of school. And so you have to go to bed early, get a good night's sleep, wear a nice dress, you know, it's first day of school. So today is the second day of school, and I'm sorry she couldn't be here. But I will always be grateful that part of our service involved the opportunity she had to go to Beijing 5 years ago to say that women's rights are human rights. And I'm grateful that she'll have a chance to continue that fight in the United States Senate. I'd also like to thank Milan Verveer, who worked with us every day for 8 years, and for Bonnie Campbell at the Department of Justice and Teresa Lohr at the Department of State. Thanks to so many of you in this room, for 8 years I've had the privilege of trying to bring Americans' actions more in line with America's beliefs. Secretary Albright and John Lewis both said we have made support for democracy and freedom of religion an important part of our foreign policy. We stood up for civil rights and against discrimination at home and abroad, and made it clear that America cannot simply stand by when human rights are trampled. Dr. King once said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. This is a lesson we can never afford to forget, especially in this fast-forward century, when satellites, email, and jet planes expand the frontiers of human contact and human awareness, and bring pain and suffering instantly home to us. Globalization is bringing us closer together with many benefits. But as with all new benefits, new responsibilities accompany them. And we have both a moral imperative and a practical incentive to do even more to recognize the rights and dignity of every person everywhere. In spite of what we have accomplished, which the Secretary of State articulated so clearly, major challenges lie ahead. We can never stop striving at home to become the more perfect union of our founders' dreams. That means we cannot abandon the struggle against discrimination and injustice here. Specifically, let me say I hope that in this abbreviated session of the Congress will send me the hate crimes legislation that we worked so hard for and which both houses have voted for, but which a minority may yet be able to prevent. If we don't get it, I certainly hope it's one of the first pieces of legislation the next administration will ask for and sign into law. We also must continue to support emerging democracies abroad. That means, of course, support for free and fair elections, but also support for strong democratic institutions, good governance, and the fight against corruption. Speaking out when the progress of democracy or the most basic human rights are under threat, whether it's the scourge of slavery in Sudan, the denial of rights to women and girls in Afghanistan, curtailing religious freedom in China. And let me say, especially to the students, religious communities, and human rights activists who have done so much to publicize the atrocities of Sudan, America must continue to press for an end to these egregious practices and make clear that the Sudanese government cannot join the community of nations until fundamental changes are made on these fronts. Ultimately, support for human rights means preparing to act to stop suffering and violence when our values and our interests demand it. We cannot right every wrong, of course, but we cannot choose inaction either. I have been reminded again and again that much of the best work in promoting human rights and defending freedom is done by people outside government, students, activists, religious leaders, from all walks of life, sharing an unshakable belief in the simple message of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all humans are free and equal in dignity and rights. 10 years after the signing of the Universal Declaration, Eleanor Roosevelt reminded us that the destiny of human rights is in the hands of all our citizens and all our communities. I established the Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Awards to honor men and women who have taken the future of human rights into their committed hands. I have had the honor of working closely with several of this year's honorees, and the equal honor of receiving advice and, on occasion, criticism from them as well. So I'd like to say a few words about each. To the Lakota Sioux, the birth of the white buffalo calf is a sign of peace and harmony to come, a prophecy of the end of war, and especially of the suffering of children. When Tilly Black Bear founded the White Buffalo Calf Women's Society more than 20 years ago, she sought to end the suffering of women and children who were victims of domestic violence. She founded the first women's shelter on an Indian reservation, and then went on to help found 2 more. A survivor of domestic violence herself, she has taught and counseled victims, batterers, and law enforcement officials alike. She is a founder and former president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, and known around the nation as a leading advocate for battered women. I want to add that fittingly, Tilly was born on Human Rights Day, December the 10th. We thank her for her courage and a lifetime of commitment. From the tall tales he loved to tell to the size of his ambitions, Fred Cooney was larger than life in every sense. But the biggest thing about him was his heart and his devotion to saving lives anywhere he could. He participated in more than 70 relief missions to some of the world's most desolate places. And wherever he went, he made a lasting difference. In Bosnia, he smuggled in enough equipment to build 2 water purification plants under snipers' noses. providing clean drinking water for 60% of the city during the worst days of the siege. General Shalikashvili called him the hero of our operations to help starving Kurds in northern Iraq. His last mission, like so many others, was to a remote and dangerous place where outsiders rarely go, but where help was desperately needed. That place was Chechnya, and Fred Cooney was killed there 5 years ago. His son Craig is here today to accept his father's award, and we thank him and all the Cooney family, and there are lots of them here, thank goodness, for the life of one of America's and the world's great humanitarians. Thank you. The story I am about to tell will not surprise anyone who has ever had any contact with Elaine Jones. She argued her first court case at the tender age of 11. She visited a dentist without getting her parents' permission. And when she couldn't pay the bill, the dentist decided to sue. Her parents had to work, so Elaine went to court alone and convinced the judge to dismiss the case. I wonder what the argument was. That's when she decided she wanted to be a lawyer, and she's been speaking truth to power ever since. She was the first African-American woman to graduate from the University of Virginia Law School. Later, the first African-American to sit on the American Bar Association Board of Governors. With a brief interruption for government services, she's been a leader in the NAACP's fight for equal justice for almost 25 years now. She is an ardent advocate before Congress, a skillful litigator before the Supreme Court, a constant voice for people in need. Thank you, Elaine, for being a champion of human rights for all Americans. In the spring of 1954, a young Army lieutenant named Norman Dorson found himself on the front lines of justice in his very first job out of law school, defending civil liberties from the attacks of Senator Joe McCarthy. Now, Norman has had other jobs and responsibilities, but he never abandoned his post in the struggle to preserve the rights and liberties of every American. He argued and prepared briefs for landmark Supreme Court cases such as Gideon v. Wainwright, which established an accused person's right to legal counsel. He was for 15 years the president of the American Civil Liberties Union. He is now chairman of the board of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. For almost 40 years, he's inspired law students as a professor at New York University Law School and director of its programs in civil liberties. I've gotten to know him through our discussions of a political third way, but today we thank him for reminding us that in every age, respect for civil liberties is the American way. Thank you, Norman. In tough places where civilians are struggling to get out, chances are you'll find Archbishop Theodore McCarrick working hard to get in and to help them. The litany of countries he has visited sounds more suited to a diplomat than an archbishop. The former Soviet Union, the Balkans, the countries devastated by Hurricane Mitch, East Timor, Ethiopia, Burundi, Cuba, Haiti, Colombia. 2 years ago, I was honored to send him as one of my representatives on a groundbreaking trip to discuss religious freedom with China's leaders. This year, he's been a tireless and effective leader in promoting debt relief for poor countries. I might say one of the truly outstanding accomplishments that we have achieved in a bipartisan fashion in this town in the last 5 years. It's an amazing thing. And at the same time, the Archbishop is much beloved for practicing at home what he preaches around the world. This year, as he pressed the United States to fund debt relief, he forgave the $10 million in debts of poor parishes in his Newark diocese. Archbishop, we thank you for your devotion to all God's children, and we welcome you to your new home in the Diocese of Washington, D.C. These 5 Americans have made our nation and the world a better place. May they continue to inspire and guide us all for years to come. Major, read the citations.
Tilly Blackbear. For more than 20 years, Tilly Blackbear has been a strong voice for Native American and women's rights and a leading advocate for women of domestic violence. She founded the first shelter for battered women on an Indian reservation and has worked with energy and determination to prevent domestic abuse, provide counseling, and empower women with the tools they need to succeed. Frederick Charles Cuney. Accepting on his behalf is his son, Craig Cuney, for a lifetime of service to the civilian victims of conflict and disaster, from Africa to Central America, from northern Iraq to Southeast Asia, from the Balkans to the Caucasus. Fred Cuney worked with vision, courage, sensitivity, and compassion to relieve suffering and rebuild lives. The individuals he inspired and the humanitarian organizations he established carry on his legacy of service today. Elaine R. Jones. In almost 3 decades at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Elaine Jones has committed herself to the pursuit of equal justice for all. As one of our nation's leading civil rights attorneys and a vital force for change, she has represented the LDF in landmark cases before the Supreme Court, promoted groundbreaking civil rights legislation, and widened the circle of opportunity for all Americans. Norman Dorson. For half a century, in landmark Supreme Court cases and congressional hearings, as president of the American Civil Liberties Union and chairman of the board of the Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, as an attorney and an educator at the New York University School of Law, Norman Dorson has been a tenacious and outspoken defender of human rights, using the power of law to uphold civil rights at home and human dignity around the world. Most Reverend Theodore Edgar McCarrick. Archbishop McCarrick has been a lifelong human rights advocate, whether seeking justice for immigrants and refugees, aiding the homeless and hungry, championing religious freedom, or advancing debt relief for developing countries. He has sought to loosen the bonds of fear, poverty, and oppression, and to affirm human dignity wherever it is denied.
You want to know what Elaine said to me? So I said, well, what argument did you make when you were 11 years old? She said, I said he didn't have permission to take all those x-rays. I mean, I was just 11 years old. So this guy was supposed to be the only person on earth that could have said no to her. We need you now, girl. That's good. That's good. The Presidential Medal of Freedom was created by President Truman to honor noble service in times of war. It was expanded by President Kennedy to honor service in times of peace. I have been privileged to award the medal to many champions of liberty. Today, we continue that tradition with a difference. The person we honor, Aung San Suu Kyi of Burma, cannot be with us. In fact, she doesn't even know we're here today, thinking of her and her struggle in her country. She sits confined as we speak here in her home in Rangoon, unable to speak to her people or the world. But her struggle continues, and her spirit still inspires us. 12 years ago, she went home to Burma to visit her ailing mother and found herself at the helm of a popular movement for democracy and human rights. A decade ago, she led her persecuted party in parliamentary elections that were neither free nor fair, yet they still won 80% of the seats. Her victory has never been recognized by the government of Burma, but her hold on the hearts of the people in Burma has never been broken. In the years since, she has seen her supporters beaten, tortured, and killed, yet she has never responded to hatred and violence in kind. All she has ever asked for is peaceful dialogue. She has been treated without mercy, yet she has preached forgiveness, promising that in a democratic Burma, there will be no retribution and nothing but honor and respect for the military. No one has done more than she to teach us that the desire for liberty is universal, that it is a matter of conscience, not culture. When her son Alexander accepted her Nobel Peace Prize, he said she would never accept such an honor in her name, but only in the name of all the people of Burma. I imagine she would say the same thing today, that she would tell us that for all she has suffered, the separation from her family, the loss of her beloved husband, nothing compares to what the Burmese people themselves have endured. Years of tyranny and poverty in a land of such inherent promise. Our thoughts are with them. This medal stands for our determination to help them see a better day. The only weapons the Burmese people have are words, reason, and the example of this astonishing, brave woman. Let us add our voices to their peaceful arsenal. Keep using every instrument of influence to support Aung San Suu Kyi's quest for democracy through dialogue. Those who rule Burma should know that they can regain their place in the world only when they regain the trust of their own people and respect their chosen leaders. And the woman we honor today should know America will always be a free friend to freedom in Burma, a friend for as long as it takes to reach the goal for which she has sacrificed so very much. I would like to ask Alexander to come up here, and I'd like to ask the Major to read the citation.
Aung San Suu Kyi, accepting on her behalf is her son, Alexander Aris. Aung San Suu Kyi is one of the world's most prominent figures in the struggle to advance democracy and human rights. In response to the tyranny and brutality of the military regime ruling her native Burma, she has become a unifying voice for the oppressed, founding the National League for Democracy and leading it to an electoral victory that has never been honored by the Burmese government. Despite enduring house arrest, separation from her loved ones, and threats against her life, she has refused to be silenced. Her unwavering commitment to securing a free Burma through nonviolent means is an inspiration to people around the world.
Thank you all for coming today. We are adjourned. Thank you.
That Tilly who